Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to provide a trigger and content warning. On Smart Talks, we often discuss sensitive and potentially distressing topics, including sexual violence, trauma, and abuse. We understand that these conversations can be challenging and may bring up difficult emotions for some of our listeners. Our full content warning pertaining to today's episode is in the show notes. If at any point in time during this episode you feel overwhelmed, we encourage you to take care of yourself, whether that means pausing the episode, seeking support from a trusted person, or accessing resources. Your well-being is our priority. If you or someone you know needs help, you can visit elizabethsmartfoundation.org for a list of resources or contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE. Thank you for joining us today. Now let's begin.
Hello, welcome to our fourth season of Smart Talks. I'm actually so excited about this season because so much work has gone into getting all of our guests in line, and it's going to be an incredible season. Dare I say it, the best one yet. Best one yet. And I want to just take a minute to introduce one of my favorite people ever. This is Heather, and she is actually the executive director of the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. And I met Heather a couple years ago, and she came on to do some consulting, and she just knew how to make things happen. I mean, I feel like I'm like, I want this and I want this and I want this vision, and there's a hole here. We need to do something about this problem. Like, I feel like I see that, or I like know what I feel passionate about, but I don't always know how to get things done. And Heather does. And so shortly after we met, by at least in my memory, it feels short. Maybe it wasn't short, but I was like, Heather, I need you. Will you come be executive director? But so you all can just get to know Heather a little bit. Heather, will you just talk about some of the work that you've done before you came to ESF?
Yeah, I'd love to. And thanks for having me on. I'm super excited about this season too. And I agree, it's the best one yet of our podcast with Smart Talks. My background is I've been in the field of sexual violence and specifically working on the issue of human trafficking for the last 14, 15 years, which is kind of crazy to say. And I've kind of touched on different parts of the issue from working with local and state governments, working with the federal government a bit, doing grants to local communities to improve their responses to these issues, but then also working directly with shelters and centers that are directly supporting victims and survivors. I worked at a statewide organization that served all children in the state of Georgia who had been exposed to trafficking, which was incredible. And we got to, from the ground up, kind of as a grassroots organization, create and incubate this nonprofit that became the statewide victim service agency and create programs to help children overcome the trauma that they had experienced through exploitation and trafficking, but then also begin to look at prevention. How can we prevent this from even happening? And then also look at other solutions to the problem, like how we reduce demand, and how we change our laws to coincide with better protections for kids, and better prosecutions and consequences for those that would harm children. So that's a part of my background, and kind of dipping and touching into the issues of family violence, sexual assault. And so it's all kind of come together in this really beautiful way now under ESF, me being able to kind of use that past experience and bring those skills over as we, grow our programs and create new programs at the foundation, and also use the voice that you've created, the voice that you have, and the voice of the foundation to bring so much more awareness to these issues throughout the U.S. So it's been a really great fit, and it's been so fun to be on board, and we've done so much in the last just year and a half on ESF.
We really have done so much. And I mean, including the whole team has done just so much, including the layout and the run up to this podcast. It's been like everyone has just been incredible. But for those of you who are new to Smart Talks, who have never heard of Elizabeth Smart Foundation or some of the work we do, we have a number of different programs that we work. And Heather, I tell you, she has worked her brains out, worked her guts out, worked her heart out to try to make sure that they are the best that they can be and continue to be that way. So it's not just set in stone, it's continuing to try to always make sure that they are improving and expanding the way that they should be. And so first off, let's talk about Smart Defense.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Smart Defense right out of the box?
So Smart Defense is one of our programs. It's probably our biggest program, the program that we've seen the most growth in so far. And it is a great combo. When I'm just explaining to people and like giving them my elevator pitch, I just say it's the best combination you can think of a hands-on smart defense, that's what it is. Self-defense course paired up with the education around what rape culture is and how best to support survivors and how to protect yourself, and what the issue and the environment in our country is around the issue of sexual assault and sexual violence overall. So, I mean, we cover things from like situational awareness, how to tap into that like instinct that you have sometimes of feeling unsafe, or like the gift of fear. We talk about that book a lot, and that kind of like philosophy, to bystander awareness, like what does that look like? When do you intervene? Can you safely intervene? And then what it looks like to physically have to defend yourself. Of course, that's the whole self-defense portion of it. You know this because you created it. But that course, I feel like we have been able to reach so many audiences in such an impactful way, because this is not a quick, like, come for an hour or two and learn, like, you got to hit here in the face and get him in the groin or do this. It's not those things. It is like fully, how do you remove yourself from a situation? How do you create space? How do you move your body? How do you use your body to your benefit? And for women, I feel like, especially the way that we teach the program, having coaches that are trauma informed, that are sensitive, that have gone through hours and hours and hours of training, knowing how to work one-on-one with survivors and just women overall. But these are men, and we're teaching them with men, because 98% of perpetrators of sexual violence are men. And so you're getting an opportunity as a woman to learn how to use your body against a male's body, which is the likelihood of how you might be harassed or assaulted. And you are learning physically how to defend yourself. If you are down and pinned to the ground, here's what you do. If you are in a chokehold, here's how you get out of it, and here's what you do. And those, I've never learned that or seen that anywhere else. It is literally like life-saving.
I mean, I never learned those skills either. And I just want to say, because I recognize that if you are raped, if you are being assaulted, then sometimes you can have all the training in the world,
yes,
and it doesn't come in the moment that you think you need it most. So I just want to say, if something has happened to you and you look back on it and you think to yourself, I should have done this, or I should have done that, or I should have, you survived. Don't think back on this and say you did something wrong, because at the end of the day, our director of the program, Mio Strong, I mean, she's like one world champion, like 5 times for her weight class in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I mean, she's highly, highly qualified. Like, she's done mixed martial arts, cage fighting. I mean, she's like a head shorter than me, but she could kill me.
She could kill all of us. She could take us all out.
She could. But she will even herself tell you that even her, with all of her training, she could be raped tomorrow. But what we hope to give you are tools, to give you options. I think the scariest situation you can find yourself in is in a situation without options. And Smart Defense, it gives you options. I mean, it does also talk about your natural instincts that you aren't even conscious. I mean, it talks about, the fight, flight, freeze, appease responses, which those are just responses that happen without you even like consciously thinking of what to do. So if you freeze, if you don't remember to strike, if you don't remember what to do, like, don't berate yourself. It's
Uh-huh.
not your fault. It's never your fault for
Yeah.
sexual assault. Obviously, I'm always going to promote smart defense. I'm always going to promote continuing to practice, because the more you practice, the more readily it will come to you.
Absolutely.
But it is never your fault. I just had to get my
No,
2 cents in
no,
there.
it's so important. And we talk so much about that in the program, like removing this guilt and shame that has somehow been so attached to this issue, specifically for women, but also for male survivors as well. Removing that as a part of our thinking of what we've all been entrenched with. And I think you're right when you talked about your brain and body's natural response to these things. I think that's so important to mention, that what underpins all part of smart defense, but also all of our programs at ESF, is a deep understanding of trauma and how trauma impacts and makes changes to our brain and our body. So like you said, fight, flight, freeze, appease, these are natural, like instinctual responses in our body and our brain. And it's so important that we understand that, to then be able to talk about how to use our bodies best, how to confront if an attack will happen. And I think the program, like we're talking about, its growth over time, it's been so exciting to kind of see, because this past session, you and our team, with a lot of support from others, worked with the Utah State Legislature to actually get Smart Defense as a certified course throughout all of the public colleges and universities in the state, which we're hoping to expand, throughout the U.S. That's our dream, right? To be able to be available at every college and university, because of the spikes that we're seeing in on-campus sexual assault, which is a huge problem. So being able to go now to all of the colleges and universities that are public for the state, I think is a huge expansion of the program, of the pilots that you guys had done a few years ago. So that's this fall and spring, which is so incredible. We're going to be able to reach so many students and so many people with this message.
Which I think is actually, universities, colleges, whichever you go to, I think it is such an important place to have this skill set taught, because I think a lot of people worry, maybe not their main worry of things that could potentially happen at a university, but are being robbed. I mean, you think you have lockers, or you put locks on lockers. You always make sure your car is locked. You always make sure, you have your phone with you, or, you are very protective over your apartment, over your stuff. But what actually is incredible, that I'm not sure many people know, is that you're 2 times as likely to be sexually assaulted than you are to be robbed.
Yeah.
And I think even universities take steps to talk about, make sure you're taking care of your stuff. Make sure you lock your this, lock that. Don't leave stuff around. It'll get stolen, blah, blah, blah. What more can we be doing to be addressing the issue of sexual assault on campus? And the other great thing about this is that it's not just for one moment in life. I mean, sexual assault can happen at any point in life. So this is a skill. This is a life skill. I know I could talk about this forever, so I'm going to try to hold myself a little bit back. But I just think of the safety that I was taught as a kid, and there's just some things that I can say. If I say, look both ways, I'm referring to before you cross the street.
Yeah.
If I say, stop, drop, and roll,
yep,
I'm referring to
if you're on fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you the very exact statistic of stop, drop, and roll, but I feel like I looked it up, and it's right between 6 and 700, 1 out of 6 or 700 people, 670s. That's the number, 1 out of 670 people. But then you look at nationwide sexual assault statistics, it's 1 in 5 women. In Utah, my home state. I feel like it should be obsolete here, but here it's 1 in 3. It's even worse than the national average. So we clearly, I'm not saying stop, drop, and roll is not worth being taught. I think safety is an excellent thing to be taught across the board, but let's address this much bigger problem that's much closer to home.
I totally agree. And I think in schools, we've started with this kind of prevention, right? With good touch, bad touch, or my no square, all these things that I think are great for younger kids. But I feel like Smart Defense is bringing it up to that adolescent and college age and beyond, which is so neat. And one of the classes that Mio and a coach were recently teaching that I went to, there was a whole group of moms with their teenage daughters that were preparing for college. They were preparing to leave for college, and they were there both taking the course together. And I was just like,
I love
that
that.
is so incredible. And if we can create that kind of generational change, right? Like you're preparing to go off to college and all that that means and what a big life change that is, but you're also you're learning how to protect yourself, and you're guarding, I mean, you're learning you're getting education to better understand the issue, but then you're also physically learning how to protect yourself. And I think it's such a great combo. And we've even expanded the program with like the kids camp that we do, so making it developmentally appropriate for a younger age group as well, and then expanding, of course, the men's program and being able to talk about how this issue impacts men. Because I think, and we talk about this all the time with Mio, if we want to make a change in sexual violence and sexual assault, we can't just be serving survivors after it happens, which that's so important, right? And it's so to both of our hearts, is to be there and support survivors. But also, you can't work in this field for too long before you're like, okay, but how do we stop this? How do we prevent this from happening to begin with? And we cannot solve this issue without engaging men in this. We talked about, the percentage of perpetrators.
Yeah. No, you're
so we
completely
have
right.
to focus on that. So that's been an exciting expansion as
It
well.
really has, which I feel like kind of leads into our next other program. It initially started off as a campaign, and it's called We Believe You, which honestly is so important to me personally. After I was rescued, everybody knew what had happened, or everybody thought they knew what had happened. Like everyone knew that I had been kidnapped. I think everyone naturally assumed that I'd been raped. I mean, I remember sitting watching TV in my parents' room just a few nights after I had been rescued, and I remember the screen went black all of a sudden, and then a picture of me popped up, and then there were words that were moving along the bottom of the screen, and it said Elizabeth Smart is not pregnant. And I remember just sitting there reading it thinking, wait, did people think I was pregnant? Like, so then that means if they think I was pregnant, that means people know that I was raped, because I felt a lot of embarrassment and shame around the sexual abuse that I experienced. And so I didn't want people to know about it. So I didn't talk about it for a long time. But I was like so mortified when I saw that, because I was so embarrassed by that. Of course, here I am now where like I feel like I talk about it all the time. But as I have gone around the country and spoken about what happened to me and spoken about the issues, and just in advocacy work, there hasn't been a time when I have mingled with the crowd afterwards that I have not had someone come up to me and say, I've never told anyone this, but the same thing that happened to you happened to me, or I was raped, or I tried to tell someone and they didn't believe me. And I couldn't believe it when first people started telling me that people didn't believe them, because as I just mentioned initially, like I never was doubted. When I said I was kidnapped, everyone was like, yeah, I know, I searched for you. You were kidnapped. One of my captors is sitting in federal prison for the rest of his life. Like it is a fact. But I think of so many survivors who were never believed and were disregarded or were doubted or were questioned. And I just think of the downward spiral that has sent, that those actions, that disbelief has sent these survivors on. I mean, just bottling up what's happened to them, not speaking out or not getting help, not having the support that they need, living in a place of fear. And so I wanted to start a movement that would not just educate people, but would really change culture, that would really change how we respond when someone discloses to you. And so that's what We Believe You initially started out as. But now
it's being expanded to something bigger, and kind of taking what happened with the campaign, with people signing pledges and buying merchandise to kind of say, like, I've taken a stand, like, I'm going to believe survivors, right? And I align myself with these thoughts and beliefs, which, like you said, are so core to our mission and who we are, like creating the societal change that's a part of our mission, and creating a compassionate society that's a part of our vision for what we want to create. But now we want to go a step beyond that with more intensive training as well. So it's, how can we bring training on how to best respond to survivors when they disclose, bringing that training and that education to communities, underpinning that again with the understanding of trauma and how experiencing sexual violence can affect a person, and what those symptoms might look like, and how to support, and understanding, again, like what we've talked about with trauma, how that changes our bodies and our brains, using incredible research like The Body Keeps the Score. That's like one of our favorite books, at ESF.
It is
And
amazing. If you haven't read it,
yeah,
read
if you
it.
haven't, there's a plug to go and read that book. It's heavy, but it's so important, and it has informed so much of what we've done, so many of our programs. But being able to take this training to schools and community groups and just people, right, at large, to say, this is what you should do. This is what you need to understand. This is how you can be a part of the solution. And then here's how you can best support a survivor in your life. And that's one of the things that we touch on too when we're in front of groups of men, is how many of you know a woman in your life, and then sharing the national and statewide stats that we've talked about, because we all know people in our life, and the likelihood that a woman, but also that a male, and a young male too, could have been victimized by sexual assault and violence. And so I think bringing that to communities, but then our next goal is to be able to, and this was influenced so much by your experiences, and I'm so excited with some of the law enforcement we've already worked on, but to also be able to take this to law enforcement agencies. And we have really great partners that are supporting us in this effort, to be able to take the training to them, covering issues of family violence and domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, child abuse, exploitation and trafficking, sextortion, right? All of these issues that kind of fall under this umbrella of sexual violence, and bringing a more compassionate response to survivors at the front end, while they are still able to, of course, follow the letter of the law in terms of how their investigations work, but creating an environment of supportive, motivational, trauma-informed interviews with survivors, where the idea is, I believe you, I want to talk to you about your experiences. And then, of course, following the chain of evidence collection, and again, still following the law, but creating an environment where survivors are welcomed to tell their stories and supported throughout that, and understanding how trauma can impact those disclosures legally, right? Like, if I'm a victim of sexual violence and I'm coming and telling you, a part of what the police are going to interview and ask me is the timeline, right? And in my brain, and the way that trauma impacts our brain, I might not know, and I might struggle with, this step happened, then this step, then this happened. And it might be, I have to like put those puzzle pieces together to understand that, and how we can be sensitive and support that, and understand the impact of, and that's just one example, right, of how that would impact an investigation, and then, of course, a response, and the perpetrator, and bringing justice to that survivor and experience. So
we've got some very exciting things. And then, of course, there is this podcast, which, yes, we do talk about some very heavy topics. We will be sharing, survivors will be sharing their stories. They're heavy. They're not light, happy stories. They are very heavy, heartbreaking stories. But it's important for them to share their stories, because we don't know who else is listening, and we don't know who's going to hear it and say, the same thing happened to me. Now I know what to do, or I know I can survive this too. We won't just be having survivors, but we will also be having experts in the fields, which I'm not going to ruin the surprises we have in store yet with our different guests, but it'll be worth following. It'll be worth listening to. It's very exciting. This is a podcast where we do talk about a lot of dark topics, but also we want to bring education.
Yeah.
We want to bring information. We want to bring compassion. And, hopefully we'll have a few laughs along the way.
Yeah. I'm excited about it because I feel like like you said, this tough, heavy topic, what has been so exciting, I think, for you and I and the guests that we have on this season is bringing hope and light to the issue through this. So yes, it's hard to hear these stories, but the people that we're talking to, especially the survivors, these stories of overcoming the worst things that have ever happened to their life, some of the worst things that humanity is capable of, right? But what they've done, what they've taken from that, how they've changed the course of their life despite that happening, what they have learned along the way, what that means to any and all of us in society. And like you said, of course, to other survivors themselves, being able to give a name to it, to know what happened to them, and to inspire, or to give them the extra boost of courage or support that they need to be able to come forward. I think that's a part of what we want to achieve with this too. And so that's been exciting for me, is just to feature, like with the topic, often I feel like we're talking about the worst of humanity, like the worst that humanity has to offer.
Completely.
Sometimes I'm just like, there are people, like human beings are capable of these atrocities against each other. And that can be such a debilitating thought, right? But with this and with our work, it brings me so much hope and joy to be able to be like, but no, on the other end of the spectrum, human beings are incredible and are capable of such amazing things despite the worst, right, having happened to them. And it's so inspiring.
It's like there's stories of we're sharing stories of human triumph, of human victory. Yeah. They go through the dark, but yeah, I think every survivor we have has turned their darkness into light. Absolutely. They've really turned it into something, into helping others around them. So very, very exciting. Very exciting changes within the foundation, very exciting things to move forward, things to come. And we're just excited to have everyone along for the journey.
Yeah. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Smart Talks. Thank you so much for joining us as we dive into these important conversations about creating a safer, more compassionate world. Remember, sexual violence affects so many, but together we can make a difference by raising awareness, supporting survivors, and advocating for change. If today's episode resonated with you, or if you know someone who would benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Let's keep the conversation going because every voice matters. You can find more resources and ways to get involved on our website at elizabethsmartfoundation.org. And if you're able, consider making a donation to help us continue our work to end sexual violence and support survivors. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference. And we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media. You'll find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok. Leave us a review from wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps us to improve and reach even more people. Thanks again for being here, and until next time, remember that each voice can spark change, and together we can make the world a safer place for everyone.